In this video, we're taking a look at 3 simple DIY projects that were recently featured in the Osborne Builder Studio. If you're interested in a more in-depth tutorial on each of these projects, be sure to check out the links below. For this build, we're using the 5/4 project lumber from Osborne in beechwood. This will match the narrow crown molding and the dental molding that we're using that is also in beechwood. I found this really classic clock insert online that I thought would be perfect for this build. We're going to build a box using the 5/4 lumber and cut out a circle in the middle that we can recess this clock insert into. I'll start by planing down the 5/4 lumber to roughly 1/2 inch thick. Once the lumber is planed down to the final thickness, I went ahead and marked out the total height of the box. Depending on how you install the crown molding on the bottom, it could add some height to the project, so keep that in mind when measuring out for yours. I chose to cut my lumber to roughly 7 inches as this fit well with my insert, but it could change depending on the mechanism that you have. Once our lumber is cut to length, I took it over to the table saw just to get a fresh edge that will be better for finishing. Next, I need to mark and cut the hole for our insert. To do this, I measured the distance between the tabs on the back side of the insert, which will allow it to have proper tension when installed. Next, I found the center of my board and then used a compass to trace a circle in the middle of the board. Once our cutout is marked, we can drill a couple holes in the center of the circle to allow us to use a jigsaw to cut out the shape. Before moving on, be sure to test fit the insert to make sure that it fits properly in the space created. Next, I cut down the width of the side pieces to make the overall profile slimmer. Once all of your pieces are cut to size, we can now start mitering the corners for assembly. I chose to do this on a table saw, but you can use a number of different tools depending on what you're comfortable with. Now that our pieces are cut out, we can assemble them using wood glue and the painter's tape method. This is great for assembling small boxes as the tape helps with alignment and clamping pressure. I'll add some wood glue to each miter, then set the box to the side and allow it to dry. While the box is drying, we can cut out the molding and trim for the top and bottom detail. For the top trim, I'm using the transitional dental molding from Osborne part 891665. Since this molding will install flat around the top of the box, I can place it against the fence of my table saw and cut a simple 45-degree miter. For the bottom molding, I'm using the narrow classic crown molding part 892144. Since this molding won't install flat around the bottom edge, we need to cut it like a traditional crown molding. I can angle the crown molding to rest against the top and bottom fence of my miter saw. Once the molding and trim is cut to size, I'll apply it to the box using some wood glue and a pin nailer. A pin nailer will help hold the molding in place while the glue dries without creating a large hole to cover later. I'll line up each seam to be as flush as possible and install the top and bottom molding on all 4 sides. The last step for assembly is to add a top. I'll use some of the leftover 5/4 lumber and cut it to size. I chose to go with a 1/2 inch reveal on all 4 sides, so for my project I needed to cut it to 7 3/4 by 5 1/4. To attach the top, I used a similar method using wood glue and a small pin nail through the top. You can use wood clamps for this part, but given the shape of the assembly, it can be a little tricky to get adequate pressure. Now that our clock is assembled, we can add a quick coat of stain and take a closer look. For this project, we're using the OG molding from Osborne part 4310 on our website. I chose red oak for this project as I plan to stain it with a really dark, warm stain. This will be built similar to a picture frame, so I'll start by mitering each piece of trim to the correct length. The overall size for our build is going to be 32.5 inches by 13.5 inches, but this can be adjusted depending on your space and requirements. When cutting miters for molding and trim, it's important to make sure that all of your measurements are accurate before cutting. It can be tricky to remember all of the different angles and measurements, so I recommend making a cut list before getting started. Next, I'll glue the molding pieces together using some wood glue and a strap clamp. You don't need to use nails or screws for this process, but if it makes your project easier, that is an option as well. Once the wood glue has been added to each of the 4 corners, you can use a strap clamp to apply pressure while drying. Make sure that you're working on a perfectly flat surface to avoid any twisting or warping in the molding while it dries. While the frame is drying, we can go ahead and cut out the middle section that we'll mount the coat hooks to. I chose 3/4 inch plywood for this part since it will be mounted inside the mitered frame. I made sure to leave a small reveal on the inside just to avoid any cracking or splitting as things may expand or contract. The dimensions for this part will depend on your project, so make sure to take that into account when creating yours. Now that our frame is dry, I chose to add some pocket holes on the back side that we'll use to attach the middle plywood. The next step is to add the mounting hardware onto the back side of the frame. There are several options for mounting this to the wall, but I chose to go with keyhole brackets for a nice flush mount. I'll start by measuring the distance from the top of the frame and then from each edge to get an idea of where the brackets would sit. The most important thing to keep in mind is to make sure that each bracket is the same distance from the top edge. This will ensure that it's level when installed onto your wall. After that, you can trace out the shape of the keyhole and cut it using a hand router. Keep in mind we will be cutting 2 different depths for this installation since the keyhole bracket needs room for the head of the screw to sit. The first pass will cut the full shape of the keyhole bracket about 1/4 inch deep. This cut will support the shoulder of the bracket while we make a deeper cut in the center to allow room for the screw head. I'll make a mark in the very center of the keyhole bracket and repeat this process for the other side. Now we can insert the keyhole hardware into the slot and install using a wood screw. You can find this hardware at most local hardware or craft stores if you're interested in this method for your installation. Now that our mounting hardware is installed, I wanted to test the fit of the center board before adding a coat of finish. For this project, I chose to stain the frame a darker color while keeping the center board lighter. If you're choosing to stain the entire assembly one color, you can go ahead and install the center board before finishing. To install the center mounting surface, we can place it in the slot and make sure that it's flush with the back side of the frame. Then we can use the pre-drilled pocket holes that we created earlier and install using a wood screw. The last step for this project is to add our coat hooks in the center of the frame. I chose to go with 4 coat hooks for my build, but you can change this based on the size of your project. Once the screw locations are marked out, pre-drill using a bit that's just smaller than the size of your screw. Then you can install the hardware using the supplied screws and a screwdriver. For this project, we'll be using a custom white oak top from Osborne, as well as the 3-sided table base kit that we designed using the custom table base builder on our website. These 3-sided kits will ship with 2 legs of your choice, as well as 3 skirt boards, and are usually attached to a wall or kitchen island. These kits assemble the same way the 4-sided version does, but will require some more attention when attaching to the tabletop that we'll show later on. As you can see here, one end of these side skirt boards is cut square. This allows it to be attached flush to the wall using either a nailer board or just straight into a stud. We're going to be using a nailer board for this project, and we'll show you how to create that in just a little bit. Before we attach the base to our tabletop, I'm going to add this 2-inch wire management grommet. I'm just going to drill a hole in the center of the tabletop on the back side. This will go against the wall and just allow me to hide some cables for my monitor, whether I'm using it as a desk. Next, I can clamp the tabletop to my work surface and use a Forstner bit to create a small pilot hole. Next, we can check the fit on our cable management grommet and just make sure that everything is working well. Then we can move on to creating the back nailer board for our installation. To do this, I'll place the table base on the tabletop and measure for the proper overhang, just making sure that the square side skirt boards are flush with the back of my tabletop. This will allow me to pull a proper measurement for my back nailer board. Now we're going to cut this to the exact distance of our 2 side skirt boards to make sure that we have a proper and flush fit whenever we go to install against the wall. The back nailer board does not come with your kit. You will need to create this on your own depending on your project installation. Next, we can attach the table base to the tabletop using the pre-installed pocket holes that will come with your kit. Then we can remove the clamp, as everything should be square and in place now. Now we can install the back nailer board and use a clamp on the front side to keep it in place while we attach it using the pre-installed pocket holes on the ends of our side skirt boards.